Paula Pant, the host of the Afford Anything podcast, likes to answer questions her listeners send in. This is a special episode where she also has Joe Saul-Sehy from the Stacking Benjamins show join in the fun.
Hi, Paula. My name is Skye. I've been listening to your podcast for about 2 months. I'm super new to thinking about and working on my financial future. I have kind of a stupid question. You talk about saving 50% of your income, but I don't really understand what that means or how that applies to your costs of living and payments and all those things. Like when you say you save 50%, does that mean everything, including your overhead for your mortgages, for yourself and all your rental properties, or your 401k contributions and your IRA, and then your emergency funds, saving for travel, whatever. And then is the other 50% that you use for your anti-budget just disposable spending, or is that the money that you're using to pay your mortgage and all those kinds of things? I would love more information about what it means to save 50% or 30% or 20% or whatever it is, but what that means when you say you save 50% of your income, how that gets handled, because I don't really fully understand that concept. Thanks so much. Love your podcast.
Skye, that's a fantastic question. So here's what I mean by save 50% or 20 or 30 or 60 or whatever percentage you want. First of all, I use the word savings as a catch-all term to refer to anything that improves your net worth. So, for example, making additional payments on a debt that is above and beyond the minimum that you have to making additional principal payments to a mortgage, for example, that I would consider savings. Retirement contributions, I would consider savings. HSA contributions, anything that improves your net worth is what I mean when I refer to, when I say the word savings. Now, in terms of if you run a business, that's where it gets a little bit trickier. So if you are self-employed or if you're an entrepreneur, then you sort of have two different forms of income, right? You've got the revenue that your business collects, and then you have what you pay yourself. And so I try to reinvest as much money as possible back into my business, partially because it's, a good tax planning, but of course never let the tax tail wag the dog, but also partially because I run a business. I want it to grow. And so it's in my best interest to reinvest back into the business in order to get it to expand. However, there is some portion of what my business earns that I pay myself. So mentally, I conceptualize myself as an employee of the business, and I take payment, I take an income from that business, and then I save 50% of that income. So I think that answers your question. Now to the other side of your question, which is what happens with the other 50% of the money, the stuff that I spend, that goes to everything, including groceries, gas, car insurance, mortgage payment, nail clippers, tweezers, nail polish remover. I mean, literally everything. So
nail polish remover, a big part of mine.
It's a huge line item in my budget.
Yeah.
So that goes to both necessities as well as discretionary spending. And for me, my necessities are not very high. My baseline cost of living is pretty low, pretty reasonable. And so a lot of it ends up, I probably have more discretionary spending than the average finance expert would advise, largely because I travel a lot. But hey, as long as I'm saving at least 50% of my income, I'm cool with that.
But you know why that is? It's because, Paula, you don't go crazy with those nail clippers. You keep the cost of your nail clippers low, and that's.
Yeah, exactly. I just sit there biting off a nail rather than using a clipper.
Yeah.
Saves me like 50 cents a year.
Which is the key 50 cents, though. I mean, that is the key 50 cents. You know what I love about this question is if somebody's trying to save half their income and they fail and they only save 40% of their income, like how bad does that stink, right?
Exactly.
It's fantastic. Set the goal high and almost reach it. You know, we have a course at Stacking Benjamins, which is Save 50. So I have very little to add except for the fact that the way we think about it, when Paula talks about anything that improves your net worth, so as an example, your mortgage payment, just the principal portion of that, any interest doesn't count, but anything that's principal payment actually counts toward saving 50% of your income. And for a lot of us, that means we're a lot closer to saving than we think we are if we have a mortgage or if we have debt that we're paying down. If we have credit card debt we're paying down, as long as we don't as long as we don't take out that debt again next month, as long as it's principal repayment that we never, ever, ever renege on, then I think it counts. And one key, Paula, that I'll give people, I like the idea of saving into a savings account, direct deposit into your savings account. So if you work for somebody else, direct deposit to a savings account, and then disassociate the amount of money that you bring in from the amount of money you spend. Because most of us, what we do is we're like, oh, I got a pay raise, and that means that I get to spend more money. The money you make should have nothing to do with the money you spend. Those can be two totally different line items. And yet, in our head, we put those two together. And by direct depositing someplace other than the checking that we spend money out of, I think we do a better job.
So interesting. So just as a note, so Joe, you and I, in terms of the way that we consider the principal repayment on the mortgage, you and I do it differently. So I don't consider
my way's right.
And actually, it's funny that you bring that up. So I don't consider the principal repayment on a mortgage to be savings. I consider that to be spending insofar as it's my baseline cost of living. It's a bill that I have to pay every month. If I make an additional principal payment beyond what's required, then that I would consider to be savings. Although, I think that does bring up kind of an interesting, in terms of the theory of finance, that does bring up an interesting point, because one of my mortgages, I refied into a 15-year. So could you argue that the additional principal payment that I'm making due to the fact that I have voluntarily chosen a 15 over a 30 is, but at that point you're sort of getting into finance theory a little bit.
Right.
Like you're sort of getting into, how do I want to conceptualize this? You can spend all day in coffee shops like philosophizing over that, but I think at the end of the day, you just pick a definition and then lead with it. So for me, my definition is, if a bill is required, then it's spending. And if it is not required, but it is a net worth improvement, then that is savings. But again, that's not to say it's the right, quote unquote, the right definition. Joe, you've got a different one. I think that's just to say that you should have a definition, a metric, and run with it.
Skye, my way's better, but I've learned to let it go.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Skye, for asking that question. I love the topic of saving 50%. Save half.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. And even, and seriously, the difference between your definition and my definition, like okay, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, we're more similar than we are different.
Well, you say that.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then be sure to subscribe to Paula's YouTube channel. Not only is every podcast episode and Ask Paula question released here on YouTube, other creative deep thought videos are created just for you. Remember, you can watch anything, just not everything. Fill your YouTube viewing time with more videos to make you think and grow so you can afford anything. Go ahead, hit that little red subscribe button. We'll take care of the rest.